Council of Mayors Executive Committee of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, the meeting of January 25th, 2022. And I will ask, item number 1 is call to order and introduction. So would you take the roll? Or we want to just have everybody introduce themselves?
How about let's have Jared call the roll, and then that way it's official.
Right, that's what I'm thinking. That's reason. Jared, would you please call the roll?
Absolutely. I'll do the full roll call. So President Austin, Mayor Barron, President Brady, President Darch,
Here.
President DeCipio, President Einhorn.
Yep.
President Gallagher.
Here.
President Hayes. Mayor Kearns. President Kolosh. President Longmas.
Here.
President Ogle. President Mack. Mayor Rockingham. Mayor Shilke.
Here.
Mayor Sherwin. President Skillman.
Here.
Mayor Tamburino. Mayor Dewson. And President Werner.
Here.
Mayor Shilke, we'd also like to note that Mayor Katrina Thompson is on the phone as well.
Very good, thank you. Okay, as permitted, I got a little script here I have to read, so everybody bear with me. As permitted by the governor's disaster declaration of January 7th, 2022, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee. To ensure that the meeting is as transparent as possible, we will post the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance, provide a recording of this meeting linked to our website, and will take all votes by roll call. CMAP staff will read the names of the members that are signed in and then ask for any other committee members that may have been missed. Did anybody come on after we started the roll call that hasn't been recognized? All right, moving then to item 2, which is the approval of the minutes of the last meeting. If somebody want to make a motion on that?
So moves.
Second.
Motion and second. Clerk, please call the roll on the approval of the minutes for the last meeting.
Yeah. President Darch.
Yes.
President Einhorn.
Yep.
President Gallagher.
Yes.
President Longmas.
Yes.
Mayor Shilke.
Yes.
President Skillman.
Yes.
President Werner.
Yes.
And the vote is approved. Okay, if there are no changes in the agenda, we'll move on to announcements. Do we have anybody that wants to make any changes in the agenda of a meeting that's been posted? Hearing none. This meeting will be recorded. Jared, can you please confirm that the recordings have begun? I think they have.
They have.
Okay, make sure, and this is to everybody that's involved here, make sure that you use your full name in the go-to meeting. You can edit your name by going to the top left corner of the screen and click go to meeting edit name. Please use the mute function through the go to meeting on your phone. This will help eliminate excessive background noise. Those on the phone can also press *6 to mute and unmute themselves. You are welcome to turn on your camera for now. Once we begin the presentations, make sure your camera is off unless you are presenting. If you have any questions during the meeting, please use the chat box, which the staff will be monitoring throughout the meeting. When making a motion, please include your name so the staff can properly record it. All right, we will go then to item 3, which is new business, and that's the CMAP update, and our Executive Director, Aaron Allman, will do this. Aaron, go ahead.
Great, thank you, Mayor Shilke, and Happy New Year to everyone. A few notes that I wanted to share with you all this morning. First and foremost, I know that probably when you saw the agenda, you thought this looks a little bit different. We did implement an agenda management system here this past year, so you will be able to find all of our agendas for all of our meetings in a single place. We've heard that the planning liaisons have found this and the regional councils have found this to be helpful already. But if you need someone to walk you through where and how to sort of get the meeting materials, we're happy to do that. Please just reach out to us directly. We've got a couple of sort of detail-oriented things that we're working on still, like formatting, but for the most part, it's up and running, and you should be able to get those links in the agenda directly if there are links necessary for your meetings. It's called Legistar, so if you see something that says Legistar, that's the product, the software product that we have. A note on local dues. We sent out local dues contribution letters at the end of the year with a due date of the end of this month. As of the beginning of the month, we've collected about 43% of the total amount billed. So we imagine those will continue to trickle in here, but we may be reaching out to councils just to remind you all that we've sent those out. In terms of state legislative updates, we anticipate that the General Assembly will continue to meet remotely, as many of us are. We continue to track bills, but if you're interested in tracking something or knowing more about it, you're always welcome to reach out to Gordon or Anthony, which reminds me that those of you who have worked with Gordon Smith for quite some time, he will be retiring or moving on from CMAP at the end of this month here. So we appreciate Gordon and all of that he's done for CMAP over the years, and sad to see him go, but happy for him and his family. The governor will deliver his State of the State address on Wednesday, February 2nd. So again, we'll be watching that pretty closely to see what's on the table there. On the federal side, I think we've been spending a lot of time really trying to understand the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA. Recently, it's been sort of retitled the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or Bill. So both of those we've been using a little bit interchangeably here. We're working with our national partners, AMPO and NARC, to go through each parts of the bill to understand what we need to do, what changes will need to be made, and prepare for opportunities, upcoming opportunities for both existing core funds that might need to be adjusted in terms of the policies that we need to apply in this region, but also what's out there competitively for us to work together on. We've met with the USDOT to talk about how we can best act as a facilitator and convener on some of the competitive programs that we have. So again, we hope to continue to engage this committee in a meaningful discussion about how we make sure that we are prepared to be as competitive as possible with the new infrastructure funds that will be available to us. Additionally, I'll just share that I'll be in DC early next month to meet with our delegation and attend NARC's legislative conference, so our National Association of Regional Councils. Another note that I wanted to share with all of you, we have selected the 2022 project group for the technical assistance program, the local technical assistance program, in partnership with the Regional Transportation Authority. We received 70 applications from across the region. Ultimately, we selected 21 projects, so we were excited to get those projects kicked off and starting here. 21 is a smaller sort of subset number than I think you've seen in the past, but our hope is to get all of those up and running here in the year and really make this program move a little bit more rapidly than we've seen in the past. So we are excited. We've got a number of new offerings too to communities that will help prepare them for influxes of money and resources, and really aligns things like their capital improvement programs and and some small area studies to be prepared for new resources. So we're excited about that program. Again, always happy to talk to this group about the offerings that we have and the projects that we'll be selecting in more detail. So the last thing that I wanted to just touch on here is a little bit about our budget planning and development process. So we have been developing our agency's annual budget and work plan, and I know this has been a pretty unique year in terms of getting a new infrastructure bill, seeing some increases in the marks across the region. We do have to have a draft budget and work plan to Idot in February. So we are working hard on that and working with our MPO, our board, and our policy committees to make sure that we are proactively thinking about what we need to be doing here as a region. There are a number of things related to the new infrastructure bill, reauthorization and some of the rules that have yet to be written, but we've been paying close attention and trying to project what we might need to do and how we might need to align our staff resources to be prepared to really manage the influx of funds that will be coming to the region and making sure that we're supporting our councils in a meaningful way as you select projects across the region. So I think, again, we have a couple places where we know that there will be activities coming. For instance, one of the things that we need to do is set aside funding for Complete Streets. So we aren't sure what that program is going to look like right now, but we know that we need to have probably staff and consultant resources for us to be able to think about implementing a project. So a couple other things that I'll just note that we've been working on that I think set us up for success as a region as this bill and the funding comes down to our region, that we have been working really hard developing a program around ADA and ADA compliance across our region. We are setting aside about $2 million in this next budget for completing assessments for ADA transition plans across the region, but ultimately this is an 8 to 10 year program and we anticipate that it will cost probably 5 times that amount to be able to execute and achieve our goals and having all of our communities and regions ADA compliant. You'll hear today a little bit about our region-wide safety initiative here. The Transportation Committee and local councils called on us to convene the region around some of the fatalities that we've been having and the fact that they continue to increase and what we should be doing to do that. So as we continue to facilitate this process, we know at the end we are going to need to set up some programs and activities to be able to address these safety challenges more tactically across the region. So that's another place where I think we'll see some additional work. And then just 2 other areas I wanted to touch on here related to the federal bill and the work of our region is that, there are new funds for a resiliency program that are in the bill. And so we are trying to figure out, what we need to do in order to achieve that. It includes a number of, I think, positive benefits for this region, one of which is that if our region has a regional resiliency plan and we put in programming metrics into our TIP, those projects would be eligible for a 90-10 split as opposed to the traditional 80-20 match, again, maximizing those dollars to our region. So that's one of those things that we want to be laser focused in making sure that we're, making our dollars go as far as possible. And then I think the last thing that I wanted to just note on here too is that there is a fund for electric vehicle planning and infrastructure planning. We too, in our work plan, are planning on kicking off a regional electric vehicle project for the region. About $15 million will come annually through the bill to Illinois for electric vehicle infrastructure. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about where some of these facilities should go, what the infrastructure looks like, how it can be equitable. I know Mayor Schilke himself has shared, there are policies around these charging stations too that we need to help support our local governments in thinking through so that people don't just park and sit there charging all day, right? Because that doesn't benefit the region, that really just benefits an individual. So, making sure that we have that infrastructure available and that we align that with what the state's been doing through the SEJA bill is really important. So, again, there are probably 20 other things that I can tell you about what we've been doing behind the scenes to make sure that we're prepared to bring home as many resources as possible through the infrastructure bill. But we will continue to bring you these programs and projects throughout the year to make sure that you're aware of what it is that we're spending our time on and how you can take advantage of our resources and we can collaborate together. So just wanted to share that with everyone this morning. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might have about the infrastructure bill or anything else that's been on your mind.
Any questions or comments for Aaron? I just want to offer up one of the things that's been asked of me by some of the other mayors in the region because of the role I have here is how we think we're going to make up for the loss in motor fuel tax revenue with the development of the electric car. And I mean, that's not something we're not going to answer today, but that's one of the big questions that I think is out there and something that I think we're going to have a seat at the table on that and have somewhat of a leadership role as we, hopefully there's some answers to that, but it's probably a few years away, but it's probably something we should begin talking about now because I think it could have a major impact on a number of municipalities. So.
Absolutely, and I'll just add to that end, the infrastructure bill includes a national advisory council on charging and sort of looking at the motor vehicle fees compared to a per mileage fee that most people think will be the future of transportation funding and how we pay for transportation funding. We've been talking closely with our delegation about getting a seat at that table to see if, to see that the Midwest is represented and to understand that this is a major metropolitan region that both has people and goods moving, and we need to make sure that we have those motor vehicle revenues to sustain our system. So great point, and definitely something that's in our work plan as well for us to be contemplating.
Well, from the political side of the question, I'll get side on behalf of the council. I'd raise it just so we all begin thinking about it, because I think it's going to be a big one in the years ahead. So, anybody else? All right. Thank you, Aaron. We will move then to 3.2, which is STP Project Selection Committee update. Are you on?
I am. Good morning, everyone. The STP Project Selection Committee last met on October 28th. At that meeting, the committee approved 3 projects to use the $5.3 million in CRISA funding. Those were the COVID relief funds that were allocated to the shared fund. Excuse me. Staff also provided an outline of shared fund methodology update topics for discussion over the next several months. Starting with our next meeting on February 10th, the committee will be discussing changes, additions, or clarifications to eligible project types, as well as individual project eligibilities. The committee is also expected to identify criteria that need no further discussion this year, as well as any new criteria such as resiliency that should be discussed. At their meetings in April and June, the committee is expected to discuss the readiness criteria, planning factors, transportation impact criteria, and subregional priority scoring. In August, then, the committee would be expected to wrap up that scoring criteria discussion and have a discussion about establishing minimum thresholds for funding consideration, which was suggested during the public comment that we received last summer on the program. In November, the committee will be asked to review the draft application booklet for the 2024 to 2028 call for shared fund projects, as well as to review the region's active program management policies. Finally, in December, almost a year from now, the committee will take final action on all policy discussions that occurred throughout the year, right ahead of the call for projects for that 2024 to 2028 cycle. Program status and regional accounting reports will continue to be provided at each of the project selection committee meetings. Those reports are still under development for the February meeting, so not included with your materials today. However, I can give a high-level report that through December, about $8.5 million was obligated for STP shared fund projects and about $15.2 million for local STP projects. This is just under 10% of the funding available to the region for federal fiscal year 22, and is pretty close to on track for where we usually are this time of the federal fiscal year. Thus far, none of the region's CRISA funding has been obligated, but as you all know, we just picked those projects this fall, and most of those projects are targeting obligation early this spring. So that concludes my report for this morning. If there's questions about the STP or CRISA programs or the project selection committee activities, I'd be more than happy to answer those.
Any questions or comments for Kama? All right. Well, thank you for your continued good job. There's a lot of moving parts in your world, and I appreciate your closeness that you maintain this for us, because I think we get our fair share because of the staff like yourself in there that's making sure that we don't let anything slip by. So I appreciate very much your good efforts.
Well, thank you, Mayor Shalke. It takes the entire TIP team as well as all the planning liaisons to make that happen. So thank you.
Okay, moving then to 3.3, the Idot Bureau of Local Roads update. Chad Riddle, are you with us?
Yeah, and I actually unmuted. So again, as said before, it's still January, so we can still say Happy New Year, everybody. And at least the sun is out and the wind is down. So that's really all I have. No, everything's good at local roads. We're moving along, and as you probably have noticed, last year toward the end we did have some lower volumes in our lettings because of all the wind down of the STP funds and all that kind of stuff. But now with it re-upping and all this influx of CRISA and everything else coming in, our lettings are picking up, and we're in the pushing 20, give or take. We had 18 on the last letting, and we got a big March and April letting coming up. So Russell, of course, is aware of all the money, so I didn't give a summary. It's just one of those, you are spending money and you're doing it well. And we just want to make sure that, and again, we're working well remotely, but we're just happy that, projects are moving along and we are getting good notice. We're not getting a lot of last minute things that just fall in our lap that we're not aware of. So that is improved over the last years and everything else. So, but I'll just take any questions. But again, we're working well here. And I think no one has noted to me that there's any problems with issues getting new projects processed through Idot at this point in time. So.
Chad, I got a question.
Uh-oh.
That's okay. What are you seeing, over or under estimates?
Actually, I think on our letting from last Friday, of our 18 projects, 16 of them came in well within estimates and very awardable with just verbal. We had 2 that came in a little high, but those were specialty projects, so those really don't necessarily count toward the normal thing. But right now our estimates are pretty much accurate. So if anything, I would say neither high nor low, but they are coming in at acceptable levels based on what we are seeing. And the other thing we're seeing is we're getting projects now that are getting multiple bids. We had projects on the last letting, I think anywhere from the minimum we had was 5. We had some that had as many as 13 bids. So the contractors at this point in time are still chomping at the bits, and that does help the competitiveness of our bidding process at this point in time.
Thanks.
Anytime.
Thank you, Mayor Einhorn. Good question. Anybody else? I just want to report that at our last policy committee, we had quite a lengthy conversation about the good working relationship that CMAP's developed with IDOT, and that things seem to be moving along very, very nicely. And there's, with all this influx of new money supposedly coming at us from the federal government, there's probably piles of paperwork out there that CMAP's going to have to participate in processing to get some of this stuff done. And Erin is trying to kind of increase her personnel in there a little bit to deal with some of this, and IDOT's in very strong.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're still plugging along here. We got a good staff here, and they're very efficient.
Yeah, Mayor Schilke, are you talking? I'm not sure that we can hear you.
Mayor Schilke. Oops. Let me see.
Oh.
Mayor Schilke. I don't know if he can hear us. Let me see if I can get Jackie. Jackie.
Well, while we get that sorted, I think we could probably move on to the next agenda item.
Please do.
Excellent. Unless anyone has any additional questions for Chad. All right, well, with that, our next agenda item is the Safety Action Agenda Update, and that is Victoria Barrett.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. I think it was about a year ago exactly that I was here to introduce the Safety Action Agenda work. And I'm happy to be back and give you a little update on what we've been up to. As you may remember, you can go to the next slide, Jared, if you would. Or can I advance, actually? I didn't ask that. Probably not. Okay. Regional Safety Action Agenda, just to recap, our work here was formed, and as Erin mentioned, it was a call by the Transportation Committee to address the regional traffic safety issues that we're looking at in a comprehensive way, and work to reduce the traffic fatalities and serious injuries in our region. Another part of that mission is to support and amplify the work of the many regional partners we have in safety, Idot included in that list, as we just talked about that partnership. Among many others, you know, there are a lot of people on the ground who work in safety every day, county engineers and advocacy organizations and mobility organizations, ADA advocacy groups. We're really working to connect with as many people on this topic because crowdsourcing safety data turns out to be a really great idea and a great way to find out what the issues are. We are working to centralize, coordinate, and sustain a long-term program for regional traffic safety. So I'll talk about this a little bit later, but really develop a stronger culture of traffic safety for our region that is focused on the issues we have. And also implement our 2050 recommendations and our strategic goals at CMAP, guiding principles such as resilience and inclusive growth and prioritized investment factor into the safety work as well. Next slide, please. So in the year since we've kicked off, the headlines have been pretty alarming. You know, our traffic fatalities have grown significantly and accompanied by a real change in travel patterns due to the pandemic. And you might think that that is a reason to not look at those years of data because travel patterns were so disrupted, but it's actually probably the case that we're finding out some weaknesses in our travel network as a result of the change in travel demand. So we're using 2020 and even 2021 now to better understand some of the issues that might be happening on our roadways. And you know, the numbers, as I mentioned, are just getting more alarming. So we have been around 1,000 in the state for the statewide fatalities, 1,000 a little bit above 2019 and before, and then in 2020 that number jumped to close to 1,200 fatalities in the state. And people thought maybe that's an anomaly and it's going to return to levels before, but 2021 was even worse, 1,360. And these are provisional numbers. These may change a little, they tend to do so, but the overall trend is pretty clear. Next slide, please. And then as a region, you know, we account for not quite 50% of the crashes and fatalities in the state, about 45% or so. So we've been hovering around 400 and that number is growing. So the light blue line here are the raw numbers of regional traffic fatalities. And the dark blue line is the 5-year average of traffic fatalities. Fatalities are often averaged over 5 years to kind of normalize the curve and understand longer term trends that kind of account for the randomness that might occur each year. But you can see very clearly that the dark blue line is still trending upwards, and we expect that to trend even steeper upwards when the 2021 numbers are officially added. So as I mentioned, our call to action with the safety work was really about reducing traffic injuries and fatalities in our region, taking a holistic approach to safety. You've probably heard of the E's of traffic safety, engineering, education, enforcement, emergency services. We want to look at each of those and probably even add some elements of human behavior and I'll talk a little bit about equity in a minute, but really look at safety from a comprehensive approach. And then look at systemic approaches to improving safety. If you're interested in safety, you've probably heard people talking about the safe systems approach. And that is ways to approach safety that are that happen across an entire network and move a little bit away from one intersection at a time, although that's also a focus of our work here at the agency. Equitable solutions are really important in safety. It's not only true that people of color are disproportionately affected by traffic safety issues, but it's also true that traditional planning practices have resulted in inequitable distribution of safety infrastructure. And finally, in line with the CMAP's goals, we want to support the safety and mobility of all modes of travel, and traditional traffic safety has probably prioritized traffic movement and traffic safety a little more. So we're really looking to the vulnerable modes who are at the most risk on our roadways and also expand their ability to move across our region. So in the last year, the safety action agenda has been busy. We've been working on gathering a group of regional safety experts and interest groups in what we're calling a resource group. We've been using them to discuss key issues and develop policy recommendations. We've met 3 times with the resource group and we'll meet again very soon here. We have started 4 local technical assistance projects focused on safety, and I'll talk about those in a minute. We have applied for and successfully acquired some grant money to purchase speed data for the first time. So one of the things that you realize when you start to understand and study speeds and the issue of speeding is that we don't really have great system-wide information about how people are moving. And with connected devices that are now inside every car in the form of either onboard devices or phones, we can take a look at probe data, which is consolidated data from connected devices, and understand how fast people are traveling in our region. So it's very exciting, it's very new, it's a new field in general. And we are going to try to use it to understand patterns of speeding in our region. We've also participated with the Roadway Safety Foundation and the FHWA to produce some pedestrian safety videos, which I believe are on linked in a recent newsletter of ours. Next slide, please. So safety planning. Yeah, this is kind of our on-the-ground work in safety. We've got 4 projects that kicked off this year. The Flossmoor Local Road Safety Plan is actually close to completion. And more recently, we've started work in Calumet City, Riverdale, and Bellwood. These are comprehensive safety projects, meaning we understand that they are locations that may have high crashes and very specific information about those crashes, but we're looking to make improvements to the intersection that look at all aspects of safety, and including the user groups that often use them, to understand what are the total needs for the community in terms of education, enforcement, engineering, and emergency services in terms of improving the safety. As I mentioned, these are often high crash locations or places where communities want to expand mobility, particularly for vulnerable modes. One example of that is in Calumet City, where we're looking at a corridor very close to the high school, where many students are bicycling to and from the high school, and we're looking to improve mobility for the high school students in that area. We're looking at this through an equity lens. 3 of these 4 communities are high need communities in our region. We're looking to improve access, mobility, and safety in all ways for all users of these roadways. And stakeholder outreach is a strong component of these projects as well. Safety has traditionally kind of been a more technical fix to communities, but it's the users of these intersections that understand the safety issues the best. So we're looking at local, nearby property owners and business owners, and as I said, targeted users of the intersections like schools and key destinations to understand the issues. And then one of the goals of these projects is to assist with data. Communities often don't have the data they need to understand the safety issues. So we're working with Idot and to facilitate access to the data so that communities can understand what the safety issues are and how to fix them. And then we'll hope to identify funding opportunities so that these planning projects become real life projects as soon as possible. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our speed management work, which is our first policy area, and kind of give you just a quick overview of the topics that we're discussing as we look to ways to manage speed in our region. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit about regional speeding data. So when we look at the number of fatal and serious injury crashes in our region, this was 2019 on this chart, about 41% are identified as having speed as a contributing factor. That's higher than the national average, which is generally about 1/3 of all crashes. So it may be an indicator that our rate of speeding is a little bit more extreme here, but it's also believed that speeding is highly underreported. So when crashes are reported, there's a limited number of contributing factors, and speeding doesn't always make the mark. So it's also true that many people don't see a crash happen and understand how to what extent speeding might have played a role. So, but interesting place to start the discussion. And what's interesting is you might think that fatal and serious injury crashes are happening only on the highways or the high-speed roadways. And that is not true, actually. What we found is that it is an issue across jurisdictions. So it means that the work that we do in safety is should be aligned with local and county safety agencies to make sure that the resources and the data are available to understand how to address them. You can see it's an issue for every level of jurisdiction and on every kind of roadway. And then the other thing that was interesting as we started to look at the data is that the share of all fatal and serious injury crashes is happening at speed on roads with speed limits that are a little lower than you might expect. So it is the 25 to 30 mile per hour speed limit roads that are seeing by far the highest number of fatal and serious injury crashes. Now, that doesn't mean that people are actually driving 25 to 30 miles per hour, but these are the types of roads on which the crashes are occurring. So they've become a focus of the work. And also compelling about these roadways is that they often have other users other than cars on them, right? So we have pedestrians and bicyclists and mobility challenged people, and it's all a mix, a very complicated mix of mobility. And when the speed limits vary between 20 and 30 miles per hour, the chance that a pedestrian will survive changes dramatically. So at 20 miles per hour, a pedestrian has a 90% chance of surviving a crash with a vehicle. At 30 miles per hour, just 10 miles faster, a pedestrian has a only 60% chance of surviving that crash. So it's a key speed bin to look at, and it covers a lot of the roadways in our region. Next slide, please. I'll talk just briefly about the relationship between design and speed limits. It's a complicated one, and they kind of inform each other in a way right now that amplifies speeding, which I won't go into details about, but if anyone wants to talk about it, I'd love to talk about it. So the question is, how do we kind of get hold of this spiraling speed through the design process issue? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that next. You can go ahead and advance. So really, right now, design in a way kind of responds to high speed limits. And we facilitate high speed travel with the way we design our roads. And the idea here is to really start by looking at a roadway and the types of uses it has to support desired operating speeds based on safety. When you maximize the role of design on a roadway, you can build on concepts like traffic calming and complete streets work and embed speed management into all aspects of a design. When you design a roadway to support a desired operating speed, then you are reducing your reliance on police enforcement to control speeds because the roadway actually informs the driver how to drive. And then the good design practices are aligned carefully with speed limits. So this concept is evolving, and the FHWA is talking about it. Lots of agencies are talking about it, self-enforcing street design. And Jared, I think if you advance a little bit, some yellow dots might come forward. Yeah, so self-enforcing street designs incorporate elements into them that slow down vehicle movement. And those are curves, those are bumps. They are also visual cues to drivers of roadway narrowing and friction that generally, and has demonstrated to show that people will drive a little bit slower. So obviously context is a big factor here. Traffic volumes are a big factor. The uses alongside of these types of streets is a big factor, but you can see it on residential streets. There are things, like traffic circles are an example. These chicanes or modified chicanes. Curb extensions here on the collector not only constrain the travelway, and which results in people generally driving slower. It also increases pedestrian visibility, reduces the crossing distance for pedestrians. So there are safety benefits at many levels of better street design. And that can happen on an arterial too. You don't often hear about traffic calming on arterials, but self-enforcing street design is a major player in good arterial design today. So that can incorporate, something as simple as better striping of crosswalks, highly visible zebra crosswalks. It can be bollards that help indicate that there are travel lanes to stay within, especially when you're looking at these channelized right turn lanes. This one here, this is a US highway in Colorado, but it's got raised cable crossings at the channelized right turn. So again, you're introducing an element of speed management along with improved pedestrian visibility and safety. So these are kinds of designs going forward that people are really looking at because they're associated with reduced crashes and reduced crash severities. When it comes to speed limits, we're one of the things we're kind of understanding is that the statutory speed limits that are set in the Illinois Vehicle Code really apply to a lot of our roadways. The one I'm going to highlight here is the urban district speed limit, which is that 30 miles per hour speed limit, which helps explain why we're seeing a lot of crashes because it applies to so many of our roadways. As we look to speed limits, we understood that 23 states have urban district speed limits lower than 30 miles per hour. So we're looking to understand if those are associated with reduced crashes and reduced fatalities in our roadway. Many states lately have been amending their language to reduce or to allow municipalities to set lower speed limits in areas where there are other modes of travel. We are looking at states that have specified specifically residential speed limits to understand if those are providing additional safety benefits on a broader level on this systemic approach. We also heard from many that the Illinois Vehicle Code has been amended a number of times and the language is a little unclear and can be a barrier to municipalities understanding what's possible. Next slide. Yeah, and then the other aspect of traffic safety is enforcement. Enforcement is an issue that we wanted to understand in terms of how effective it is and what are the issues that we need to really understand going into it. As many of us probably know, enforcement of speeding is effective. We often understand that when we are going to be enforced, we will change our behavior and lower our speeds, but it's generally only effective for the time and space in which it exists. So the data really show that after enforcement is over, people not only recover to their initial operating speed, but they will do so exponentially, which creates an acceleration issue and could be dangerous for safety as well. So what we really want to do is make sure that enforcement approaches are aligned with safety outcomes and equity outcomes that we desire. So we are focusing on changing behavior with enforcement and increasing the ability for enforcement to encourage better behavior and also reduce the equity impacts that are associated with poor enforcement. So that is I think I just actually talked about everything on this slide. Align with safety benefits, yes. Okay, so finally, the last thing we want to do is expand the information and education in our region regarding traffic safety. There are issues in our region that are slightly different from the statewide issues with traffic safety, and we want to be a resource for our local municipalities and our counties on safety, provide data and information and resources. Things that we also want to do with speeding, lessen the degree to which speeding is accepted behavior. So we'll work with our partners to work on programs and campaigns associated with that. And as I mentioned, provide meaningful data for our regional partners. here's an example of a dashboard that the Boston MPO is putting forward. So we hope at some point that we are a resource for you all on traffic safety in terms of data, information, and resources. Yeah, so next steps in safety, we're going to finalize the speed management topic. We have kicked off the bicycle and pedestrian safety topic, which is the next one, the next policy direction that we're going to develop. And we will meet with our resource group 3 more times this year and start to analyze this regional speed data that I mentioned to understand where speeding is occurring in our region and what we can do to reduce it and wrap up our LTA work by about June of this year. So I'm happy to take any questions. I've thrown a couple questions out to the group. You know, as I mentioned, crowdsourcing safety information and data is really valuable because we all participate in the transportation network every day and people witness different things. So with that, I welcome questions and also just contact at any point if you have safety concerns you want to talk about.
Do we have any questions, Vicki?
I have one, Jeff.
Go ahead.
When we have crashes, particularly on the expressways in Chicago, there as a result of somebody deciding to shoot at somebody else, is that number pushing our crash numbers up, or is that number eliminated because it really didn't result from driving issues?
Right. My understanding is when there's like a criminal aspect to that is not considered a traffic safety crash. It gets reported separately.
Victoria,
Okay,
thank
well-
you for that report. I had one question. This is Alice Gallagher. As far as you were talking about collecting speed data from vehicles that have the technology or mobile devices connected to their vehicles, are there privacy concerns related to that?
That's a good question. One of the things that these companies do that collect probe data is they generally anonymize it all. So we don't have any personal or identifying information as a part of the probe data. It's aggregated and then reported as just numbers.
Just where they were driving and what the speed was.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Spot speeds, exactly.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We thank Vicki for a very comprehensive report. I'd certainly encourage everybody that has any other questions that come up, please feel free to contact her we're showing the address there on the screen now, or her phone number, because this is an ongoing study that we're doing, and I think it does have regional benefits that are very strong and sincere. So thank you again for a great presentation today.
Thank you, Mayor Shelkey.
Okay, we'll move to item 3.5, which is zoning for housing choice and equity. Jake Side, are you here?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor Shelkey. I'm going to try and share my screen briefly if I can. Can you all see that okay? Aaron, can I get a thumbs up? All right.
Yeah,
Sweet.
I can see it.
Great. You know, 2 years into the pandemic, still figuring out these things, but I'm getting there. So good morning, everyone. My name's Jake Side. I'm a planner here at CMAP. For folks who don't know me, I've been writing zoning and subdivision ordinances for about 15 years now. I've worked on both the private consulting side and on the public sector, both at the municipal level and of course here at CMAP for about the last 9 years. We know that one of the many responsibilities of the Council of Mayors is to help assure regional equity in planning decisions. These days, leaders throughout the region are reckoning with how planning has been used as a tool for segregation for many years. So moving forward, we're trying to address how local leaders like yourselves can address issues of diversity, equity, inclusion through zoning. So at this point, we have an opportunity here to measure evaluate, and evolve to create more housing choice. Our goal for this session is to give you context on how to measure and evaluate your zoning code. And from there, to talk through the tough part, which is to talk with your other local leaders and your residents about how ordinances can evolve to create more inclusive communities. So our agenda today. First, we're going to talk about the big picture and a little bit of historical context about single-family zoning. Next, we'll want to provide some examples of how communities in the Chicago region are making our zoning codes more equitable, focusing on local partners. We'll wrap up with how you can make a difference in your community, and we definitely want to leave time for questions and answers because we want to hear your experiences on these issues as well. Okay, so CMAP is focusing on zoning and equity to help implement our goals of the On2 2050 plan. As you all know, the plan has 3 guiding principles: resilience, prioritized investment, and inclusive growth. Inclusive growth is similar to a goal for regional equity in that we are seeking to grow our economy through opportunity for all. The goal is to find ways to actively ensure fairness and justice for everyone in the region. And your zoning ordinance is your #1 tool when it comes to economic development. CMAP's Local Technical Assistance Program has completed almost 24 zoning projects in the region over the last 15 years. We've done zoning projects both with CMAP staff and also by working with local consultants. Folks like Jared Patton, Patrick Day, and I have worked with communities large and small in every county in the region. Places like Berwyn, Park Forest, and South Elgin, Bensonville, Harvard, Carroll Stream, Oswego, and Waukegan. We do an annual call for projects, and we're always looking for partners that are interested in doing zoning updates with an emphasis on creating more inclusive and equitable communities. All right, so what is zoning? We all know what zoning is, right? Well, just in case, zoning laws regulate the use of land within a municipality. It controls the ways that land can be developed and how it can be used. Zoning is basically what keeps a residential district residential, a commercial district commercial, and an industrial district industrial. Okay, so if that's the case, what's equitable zoning? Equitable zoning is where CMAP has been as an agency in our partnerships through LTA. It's where we are now, and it's where we hope to work with more communities in the future. Equitable zoning is zoning that helps people that need the most help. And there's a difference between equality and equity too. I'm sure many of you have been talking about this in your communities lately as well. Equality means everyone gets the same thing. So on this slide, in the picture on the left of this baseball game, everyone gets 1 box to stand on. Everyone can see a little bit better, but the little guy on the end still can't see anything at all. Equity means that resources and opportunities are provided so that everyone has a chance to be successful. Now in the picture on the right, the little guy gets 2 boxes, the one in the middle gets 1 box, and the big guy doesn't need anything at all. So to tie this all together, equitable zoning means taking a fresh look at our neighborhoods to make sure that everyone is welcome and has a chance to succeed. And generally, that's most associated with where people are allowed to live. And our next few slides are going to talk more about this. So what are the limitations of single-family zoning? What's the big deal about this? Well, it goes back to this idea of where people are allowed to live. For decades, single-family zoning has reinforced racial and economic segregation. It reduces housing options, seeing multifamily development as less desirable than single-family development. And single-family zoning encourages sprawl, especially in a time of climate change and tough questions about drinking water throughout the Chicago region. So single-family neighborhoods are not the problem per se, and I want to be clear about that. CMAP is not against single-family zoning by any means. It's only a problem if it's too rigid and prohibits other types of zoning. And these are hard things to admit, especially as someone like myself and other members of our staff that's been working on zoning ordinances for a big part of our careers. We usually think of zoning and government policies like these as important tools to help people to do the right thing. But often zoning can do harm as well. Okay, so I've got a question for you folks. Do any of you have a sense of how much of your community is zoned single family? Feel free to turn your mic on or put it in the chat. Well, you know, if not, CMAP has calculated that 80% of the average community allows single-family zoning resident, a single-family residential development. So that is a big number. So on a regional scale, you know, picture our zoning map here, and 80% of that map being the same color on the map for single-family development. In comparison, less than 1% allows duplexes and townhomes, and about 2% allows apartments and condos. So these single-family zoning districts are very widespread. You know this from just, you know, driving around your communities. And these are places where we have an enormous opportunity to make an impact. So I just wanted to take a quick step back and talk a little bit about the historical context here. You know, by no means is zoning the cause of the inequities in modern society, but it has contributed to them over time. And so I wanted to touch on this case from the Supreme Court, Euclid versus Ambler from 1926. With this case, the court upheld that zoning was constitutional. It ruled that zoning was an appropriate use of the local police power because it protected the public welfare. So this has long been seen as a huge win for planners and local leaders of Supreme Court support for this land use device. However, as part of the Euclid decision, the court found that it was okay to separate land uses, and in some sense, okay to separate people in some ways as well. So the decision in the case actually stated a preference for single-family zoning and said that very often the apartment house is a parasite on otherwise upstanding single-family neighborhoods. So in a nutshell, the Euclid case says you can separate people by land use. So it sets a pattern for development in the decades to come. And if we fast forward a little bit to the post-World War II period, many of us are familiar with white flight during this time, with white people leaving major cities for less racially diverse suburbs. There were a number of tools that were used during this time to cause white flight and keep it going. Things like redlining, racial covenants, block busting, and steering. These were all real estate practices that created property value in white neighborhoods while devaluing property in black and brown neighborhoods. And mortgage approval was a key factor in this as well. It was much harder for black families to qualify for a loan than a white family of similar means. And recent data shows that these overall trends remained in effect for mortgage approval since the post-World War II era. And for many of you, this is not new information, but it provides a little bit of context on where some of these zoning choices have been made in recent history. So the point we're trying to illustrate is that mayors in the region have inherited patterns of inequality in suburban development. Zoning perpetuates these patterns of inequality by location. So we have owners in one location, renters in another. We have higher income folks in one area, lower income folks in another. Strong schools and more amenities like parks in one area, weaker schools and fewer amenities in others. And if you look at the dichotomy, generally speaking, of course, there tends to be, you know, more white communities on the left side of that ledger and more communities of color on the right. Further complicating matters on this issue is that people's biggest investment is often their home. That's certainly true for me. And as you know, local politics is often dominated by homeowners. You've all been at these meetings. I think many of us have. Homeowners tend to favor policies that increase property values. Of course, that would be the right thing to do in their minds. And single-family zoning is perceived as doing just that. So this system has been ingrained by law, but also because there's a perception that it's in people's best interest financially as well. Okay, so these patterns seem static because our zoning maps seem static, but the maps and the ordinances can evolve. There are lots of ways that your staff can get into the nuts and bolts of zoning regulations to help break these patterns as well. In our experience, there are 4 major areas of the zoning code to focus on in terms of an equity group. This is the type of work that we've done in almost 24 communities throughout the CMAP region over the last few years. The first is the use of language. Using language that is easy to read and easy to understand. Drop the legalese and look at problematic terms like the definition of family. Second, create zoning districts that allow for a mix of uses. Mixed use districts with commercial and residential uses feed on one another and make for more robust walkable places. Third, reduce parking minimum requirements so that developers don't have to build parking spaces that your community doesn't need. And finally, look at what uses are allowed, particularly when it comes to housing types. And my next 2 slides are going to focus on this last piece of the equation to give you a little bit more background. So CMAP's ordinances generally avoid the typical single-family zoning district. Our goal is to provide a range of housing types, knowing that smaller footprints tend to cost less. Now, you might be thinking, my community doesn't want to have that added housing density here, but really this is more about housing choice than housing density. So this is the type of housing we would see for aging parents, housing for recent college graduates, housing for essential workers in our communities. And in order for communities in the region to keep growing, they need to offer more of these housing options. Our goal is to allow more and more housing options to make neighborhoods more equitable for people who aren't necessarily property owners. So we like to allow townhomes, duplexes, and accessory dwelling units, also known as granny flats, in all single-family zoning districts in our codes. These housing types provide housing choice and help maintain the look and feel of a single-family neighborhood. And states around the country have already enacted statewide legislation around single-family housing as well. You know, the goal here is to attract and retain residents as, you know, people keep shuffling around the country in the, you know, COVID world that we live in right now. Most recently, places like Massachusetts, Oregon, and California have adopted legislation, but it's not a red state, blue state issue. Places like Montana and New Hampshire also have bills in their state legislatures as well for housing choice. Illinois hasn't made a statewide effort on this up to this point, so it's really up to our municipalities to make a difference. And if you really want to push the envelope, there are even more options. We are experimenting now with allowing 3 and 4 unit dwellings that blend in with single family districts. The photo on the top here is a 3-unit home that looks like a single family home. The photo on the bottom is a 6-unit building that's designed to look like a very large single family home. The architects actually call it a mansion apartment. And all residential zoning districts should have a required design standard to ensure that the look of the homes is consistent with surrounding single family neighborhoods. Because we're really focusing on new development here. And we can certainly do this in zoning. These design requirements can even apply to accessory dwelling units and granny flats too. So in that vein, we recommend removing density requirements for your multifamily districts, right? So looking at the multifamily districts as well. Now you may have seen these districts or these standards in your code. It's X square feet for a studio apartment, Y square feet for a 1-bedroom, and Z square feet for a 2-bedroom, let's say. These numbers are often based on, you know, one good project in town that worked, maybe several years ago. But they remain a barrier to developing multifamily buildings because the units are often larger than what the current market demands. Okay, so wrapping up, we wanted to give you some things to keep in mind about zoning updates, you know, as you think about going through this journey. So, you know, as you know, the new zoning standards are not a silver bullet. Zoning can be part of the solution, but it is not the solution. Ideally, ordinance updates will be complemented by affordable housing goals, planning, and policy. Next, incremental work on your codes is incredibly valuable. A full zoning ordinance rewrite is not necessary. We recommend that you start small and work your way up, find a foothold with your residents, and go from there. Another thing to keep in mind is that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to reimagining single-family zoning districts. Low-income neighborhoods have a significant interest in hanging onto their single-family zoning districts to provide housing stability. Similarly, blanket upzonings of these areas could create the potential for gentrification, particularly in communities of color. We've also learned that outreach and education is key. People just don't understand zoning, and who can blame them? It's complicated, it's bureaucratic. We need to think about how we can communicate the benefits of updated zoning to other local officials and residents, and CMAP can help with that. One of the ways to do this is to make sure that people understand that neighborhoods change very slowly. Removing single-family zoning will not remove single-family neighborhoods. Just because you allow new types of housing doesn't mean the neighborhoods are going to change overnight. There are very few housing markets in the Chicago region with enough demand for things to change that quickly. So the goal here is to reduce barriers to housing choice and ultimately provide more housing. Expensive neighborhoods are likely to continue to be expensive neighborhoods, but there's more housing supply and hopefully more housing diversity over time. Okay, so where do we go from here? What's next? Well, we recommend that you discuss ordinance changes with CMAP, with your local staff, with your village attorneys. You know, remember as you talk to the public about this, you know, we always say yes stays home and no goes to the meeting. What we mean by that is that many people support greater housing choice, but very few of them actually take the time to go to public meetings to make their opinions felt. Next, update your comprehensive plans so that they can discuss housing choice as a component of the land use plan. And finally, of course, update your zoning code to implement the goals of local housing policy. Communities around the region are already on this journey, and we can help you take the next steps as well. All right, so that's all I have. Thank you very much for your time. Please contact us if you have any questions or need further resources, and I'd be happy to take any questions or comments at this time.
Do you have any questions for Jake? I appreciate your good, very, very interesting presentation. I may call you myself one of these days and give you some insights from Batavia, because we've got some things out here that are a little bit unique to what you just said. I'd like to clue you in on what I'm feeling happening in my town. One of them is we got a whole bunch of people that want to have multiple cars. And so it's not unusual that we have homes now with 4, 5, 6 cars. It's creating a big problem for us.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you more about that, Mr. Mayor.
So, all right, well, thank you.
Jeff, Karen Darch, I have a comment. And just that I think your point about one size doesn't fit all. Jake, living out here, so I live in the village of Barrington, which is very heterogeneous in housing stock. We do have a lot of multifamily, a lot of rental, and a lot of single family neighborhoods. But next door neighbor, Barrington Hills, is exclusively single family residential, 5-acre zoning. And in my mind, I think when we look at the region, if we offer the choice and the diversity of housing stock across communities, that when you look at an individual community's zoning code, it may serve a purpose for the people who choose to live on wide open spaces. And particularly out here where we have ground water, an aquifer system is a huge benefit to many of the communities to the east of Barrington Hills and McHenry County, that there are wide open spaces and large lot single family homes, because the water flows, recharges on those lots and in that space, and serves all of us who are drawing that same water supply. So I sometimes feel like when we talk about this, and I don't know, Aaron and I had a discussion with a CMAP newsletter that went out, and it was the way exclusionary single family zoning was posited in that statement. Yeah. And I think it's important that communities that might have exclusively single family may have done that by choice, but it doesn't preclude their next door neighbor towns or other towns in our region from offering way more multifamily or for other people who choose to live that way. The reason that we may have single family may not be for a negative motivation or a discriminatory reason, but may have developed because of how people were choosing to live. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox, but I just want to kind of put that on the record too. Thanks.
No, thank you for that point. I really appreciate you bringing that up. When we talk about zoning, it is often at the municipal level. And when we think about these relationships between neighboring communities, when it comes to issues of zoning, housing, and environment issues, it becomes much more complicated. That's why we found it so interesting what some of these other states have been doing with statewide zoning legislation to put everybody on the same playing field.
Well, very good. Thank you again for this report. It was very enticing to, I think, all the mayors to think about what you've said, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from you again very soon. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move then to 3.6, which is social economic forecast. David Clark. David, are you with us?
I am here. Hello, everybody. Last October, we presented to you on the draft regional forecast and some of the assumptions behind the forecast. And so today we'll be presenting the final regional population and employment projections and outline some of the next steps in the process. My name is David Clark. I'm a senior analyst within the research and innovation team here at CMAP. But to start out, my colleague Alexis McAdams, who associate analyst with CMAP, will begin to talk about the demographic projection. So Alexis.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. Next slide, please. All right, so just a quick overview of the demographic forecast. The update for the ONTO 2050 update follows and builds off of established methodologies and techniques used by Louis Berger, the consultant who produced the original ONTO 2050 socioeconomic forecast. Though for this time for the update, the demographic modeling tools have been adapted to an in-house platform, which is allowing us some more options for flexibility and customization into the future. We've also updated our base year data to 2020 where possible, although full detailed 2020 census results won't be available to us until later this year. So the primary output of the model is an estimate of the population of the region by age and by sex. And it is produced not only for the 7-county CMAP region, but also for the neighboring multi-county regions, which you can see kind of faded out in this image to the right. Those regions are included in our travel modeling efforts, but today we'll only be covering the results, the sum total results for the 7-county CMAP region. Next slide, please. So looking at the top level results, we've produced an estimation that the 7-county CMAP region will reach a total population of roughly 10 million persons by the year 2050. Next slide, please. And one more tap. Thank you. When we compare this to the results of the original ONTO 2050 forecast shown here in red, we see that the 2050 population estimation differs by about 800,000 people. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, we're using much of the same methodology used in the previous forecast, but one of the major differences is that we're updating our base year data from 2010 to 2020. And you can see the impact of this change, how the red and blue lines separate. In the year 2020, Berger overpredicted the population of the region by about 500,000 folks. And that has been corrected in our forecast update, but that difference persists forwards throughout the forecast period, contributing to that difference by 2050. Another contributing factor, oh, I'm sorry, go back one more, please. Another contributing factor to this difference is the inclusion of the updated employment forecast, which influences the migration component of our demographic model. And these are the two main factors that are contributing to this difference by 2050. Next slide, please. So like many industrialized nations, the United States is observing lower fertility rates over time. And though we're also observing higher life expectancies, the aging of the baby boomer generation will result in an increase over the course of our forecast period. So some of our major assumptions in our model is that the nationally observed trends of declining fertility and increased life expectancy will continue into the future, this will result in fewer births and more deaths over time. So this chart depicts the projected number of births in light blue and the projected number of deaths in dark blue in our 7-county region over the forecast period. And you can see that these bars are tending to converge by the year 2050. And as a result of these trends, our model's predicting slowing population growth, especially across the latter half of the forecast period. So where these 2 blue bars are getting closer together. Next slide, please. So next, this is a chart that's comparing the characteristics of the 2020 population here in dark blue with the 2050 population in teal by larger age groups. So similar to the results of the On to 2050 forecast, we're predicting significant increases in the number of individuals over the age of 65 in the 7-county CMAQ region, with more modest increases for the number of folks in other age categories, such as 0 to 19, 20 to 39, and 40 to 65 years. Next slide, please. So following the completion of our population projections, we can derive estimates of other items, including things like the number of households. We're predicting to see about 4.1 million households in the 7-county region by the year 2050, which is slightly lower than the On to 2050 forecast of 4.25 million households. One particular consequence of declining fertility or births and increasing life expectancies is the change in the average household size of the region. So even though the number of households, which is depicted here with the orange bars, will increase over time, the average number of people in those households, which are the values at the top of each of those bars, is projected to decrease. So generally speaking, we're seeing the impacts of families having maybe 1 or 2 kids instead of 3, 4, or more that was more common in the past. And additionally, empty nesters and elderly folks increasingly live as couples or alone, which drives down the average household size. And again, this is a continuation of regions observed not only in the Chicagoland region, but also across the nation. Next slide, please. So another product that we can derive from our population projections are estimates of the total population by race and ethnicity. And similar to the On to 2050 forecast, we're expecting to see larger growth in the total number of Hispanic and Asian persons in the region by 2050, with more modest growth for non-Hispanic white, Black, and other populations. So this wraps up my quick summary of the demographic forecast, and I'll hand it back to David to cover the employment forecast results and the local allocation process, and followed with some time for questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Alexis. Next slide, please. Thanks. Okay, so like the demographic forecast, we wanted a process similar to what was done for the On to 2050 employment forecast. We engaged a consultant to not only develop the forecast, but to provide us with the necessary tools and documentations so that we can repeat the process on our own in the future. Forecast is broken out by 2-digit NAICS sector, which are 20 major industrial categories, such as manufacturing, retail, healthcare, and so on. The projections are in 5-year intervals out to the planned horizon year of 2050, using Moody's Analytics as the foundation for what we call a baseline or most likely scenario. As part of our contract, our consultants also provided optimistic and pessimistic scenarios based on national macroeconomic assumptions from Moody's. Next slide, please. So this graph shows estimated employment from 2010 through 2020 and projected employment out to 2050. The region's employment peaked at 4.53 million jobs in 2019 before the COVID-19 pandemic caused it to drop sharply to 4.18 million jobs in 2020. This forecast, suggests a relatively quick recovery with 75% of the pandemic job losses recovered by 2023 and a full recovery by 2028. Continued growth is forecasted through 2050 when the region will reach a total of 4.81 million jobs. This represents a 6% gain over 2019 employment and a 15% gain over 2020 employment. And for comparison on this slide, the optimistic and pessimistic projections are shown as well. Next slide, please. So for comparison, here's how the current employment forecast measures up against the 2050 forecast from 4 years ago. The previous forecast had roughly 600,000 more jobs by 2050 than what is currently being projected. And there are two major factors behind this. The first is obvious in this chart, and that's the effect of the COVID pandemic, which I discussed in the previous slide. Another factor is more procedural. The original On to 2050 forecast included a human capital plus transportation scenario that we opted not to use in the current forecast. That scenario pushed up the previous employment forecast up by 175,000 jobs, a number which represents 27% of the overall difference between this updated forecast and the original On to 2050 forecast. Next slide, please. This last slide shows how different employment sectors will evolve in the coming decades. The dark bars for each sector represent 2010 employment, and the lighter bars show the projected 2050 totals. Most sectors are forecasted to gain jobs by 2050 relative to their 2019 pre-pandemic peaks. Professional, scientific, technical services in particular is expected to grow by 28%, which would make it the region's second largest sector. Currently, it's only the sixth largest. Healthcare and social assistance is expected to grow by 6% and remain the region's largest sector. Manufacturing sector is forecasted to shrink by 23%, largely due to automation, and cause it to drop from the region's fifth largest to eighth largest sector. Next slide, please. So for up to this point, we've been talking about the regional forecast. And of course, we need to generate local level forecasts as well, a process that we called the local area allocation 4 years ago. For this cycle, we've been developing a land use model called Urban Sim to handle the local allocation. This is a step up from the spreadsheet-based tool that we used in the original On to 2050 forecast. Urban Sim is considered a microsimulation model, meaning it works at a highly detailed level with data on individual parcels and buildings, households, and businesses. This involved a major data gathering effort, including collecting zoning data for the entire region, which helped inform one of Jake's slides in the last presentation. But we needed that data to identify local constraints, to where development is allowed and what type of buildings, what type of density, and also, next slide, please. We also did a major update to our in-house development tracking database, NDD, to ensure that all known development activity is included in the model's development pipeline. Next slide, please. So this lowered regional forecast naturally will translate into lower local forecasts. While we don't have draft figures available yet, I can tell you that reductions won't be consistent across the region. This will in part be because of our work with the Urban Sim model, which makes decisions at the parcel level rather than a weighted assignment approach that was used with the spreadsheet in the last cycle. So for example, having parcel level data on zoning will result in different distributions of households and employment throughout the region. Also, our updated development assumptions include new large-scale projects such as Bronzeville Lakefront and One Central, as well as over 18 million square feet of newer planned warehousing and distribution space in Will County, to cite a few examples. There will, of course, be consistency with On to 2050 priorities, particularly in regards to an emphasis on infill supportive areas, as well as reinvestment in disinvested communities. Finally, a quick look at the timeline going forward. Regional household and employment forecasts are essentially complete, and we should be publishing data that we shared with you in greater detail in the coming weeks. We expect to have draft county level forecasts by late February, which will be released this spring as part of the public comment draft of the plan's socioeconomic forecast appendix. And all results and documentation will be released upon plan adoption in October. Next slide. And with that, if you all have any questions.
Any questions for anybody? Well, David, we thank you for your report, and we'll continue to listen to what you have to report, because you've got some interesting information you're sharing here. So thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay, our next one is going to be Patrick Day is going to give us an update on the local government network.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This was a brief presentation to begin with, about 30 seconds, but I'm going to increase efficiency by 2/3 with about a 10-second update here. Last quarter, we completed our 10th initiative for the local government network, and that was to drive applications for our local technical assistance program. That was very successful. And in the current quarter, we are going to be reaching out to partners to ensure that for calendar year 2022, we have correct contact information and preferred contacts for this upcoming year's initiatives. And we're also going to be doing an internal initiative to identify projects for this year's initiatives. So we're going to be reaching out for that. And in this past year, we had great success connecting with partners, with DCEO, with executive directors for councils to make those connections, particularly for ARPA. We're going to be looking for initiatives that meet the most critical needs to connect communities to transportation funding. So we'll be reaching out on that. And if you have any preferred initiatives, you can contact me directly or talk to your local government network planning liaison. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions of Patrick? Appreciate that. We'll continue to listen to what you have to offer too. Okay, next one we're going to go to is our old friend Gordon Smith with his legislative update. Gordy, are you on?
He is not on. There is no formal update. But if you have any questions, Anthony, I think, is available.
Right.
And also Tim is available if anybody had any federal questions.
Well, our friends at the state government are kind of in a, I'm going to be polite here. They're just not meeting too much these days. So as a result, I guess we don't have much to say. Got to keep our eye on those folks, though. They've got all kinds of strange things that are being proposed down there. So I appreciate very much that we are continuing to do this. I was hoping we'd get Gordon on the line here for a moment, because if he's retiring, I'd like to thank him for an outstanding run of service here with us. He's been with us a long time here and knows where all the bodies are buried, so to speak, in the political world. So I appreciate having him around. So he's going to be a hard guy to replace. So I just hopefully we'll have a chance to talk to him at least one more time here. And then maybe at the next meeting, we can arrange to have him here for a couple of minutes so myself and some others can say thanks for a great job that he's done. So, all right.
We'll pass that along to him too.
Okay. Moving to 4, which is other business. Do we have any other business from anybody else? All right. Do we have any public comment today? I don't have any here.
And we haven't received any in the chat box, Mayor.
Very good. All right, then our next meeting will be held on April 19th, 2022, and I'm assuming we'll be still in the same format, do you think? I imagine we will. I'd like to get the meeting sometime to get the group into Chicago to see the new facilities, but obviously we want to do that in a cautious way and not, subject anybody to any COVID or anything. So we'll have to play that by ear, I guess, but appreciate the good efforts.
Mayor Shelkey?
Yeah.
Karen Darch, question. Do we have the rest of the meeting schedule for the year? April 19th, but then do we have July and whatever, October or next ones after that scheduled?
Yes, Mayor Darch. Let me find them all now.
Oh.
And it's on the website. So
okay.
And with the new system, Mayor Darch, it's not up yet, but it will be up that all the upcoming meetings are going to be there. And so we can send out a note for all of you so that we can point you to where all the meetings will be. And then that way you'll be aware of every meeting that's going on at the agency. How about that?
Sounds good. Thank you.
We've also got July 19th and September 13th seem to be the next two meetings for this committee.
Great. Thank you.
Anybody else have anything else? If there's no other business before the committee, I will adjourn the meeting, and I look forward to talking to you all in April. So we will adjourn this meeting, and the next meeting is April 19th.
Can
Thank
I
you.
bother a couple of you for a motion and a second to adjourn?
Oh, we do? Okay,
Sure. I'll make a
Alice
motion.
Gallagher, oh, go ahead. I'll second Alice Gallagher.
Thank you so
okay, we
much.
have a motion and second then for the adjournment. Can we just do a voice vote here?
Just
All
all
those
in favor.
signify by
Yeah.
saying aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. It didn't